The Middle East has been a core region of concern for a big part of recorded history. Civilization first took root in the soggy riverbanks of Mesopotamia. Empires rose and fell in its lands, and successors found themselves returning due to proximity, foodstuffs, or control over trading routes. Three of the world's great religions formed here. The primary reason for U.S. involvement in recent decades can be summed up in one word: oil. The Persian Gulf region wasn't just another cog in the clockwork of America's alliance strategy, it was the central piece that enabled the rest of it to work. The Americans used global trade to buy themselves a global alliance. Global trade requires oil. The Persian Gulf has oil in spades, and so the Americans had no choice. At first, the Americans just kept the oil flowing for their allies, but in 1973, the Americans became net importers themselves, giving more reason to be obsessed with all things Middle Eastern. Standard American operating procedure was to spare no expense in entertaining regional diplomats and to sell regional allies weapons systems reserved for America's closest allies. Washington's backing proved central to bolstering the Shah's Iran against the Soviets. After the Shah's fall in 1979, American support proved equally critical to the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, standing up to Islamic Iran. Massive outlays of American power were on occasion deployed in order to preserve or alter the regional balances of power in order to maintain energy flows. U.S. naval forces kept the 1980-1988 Iran-Iraq War from spilling onto the waters of the Gulf. The U.S. Army ejected Iraqi forces from Kuwait in 1991. The full might of American power destroyed Iraq in the 2003 invasion. The best measure of commitment are the deployment patterns of the supercarriers, the backbone of American power projection. American global strategy could not risk the local powers engaging in a conflict in which oil flows and oil assets might be inadvertently damaged, much less directly targeted. So the Americans have kept a permanent naval presence in the Persian Gulf since 1971 to quash local competition, to ensure the oil would continue flowing. Recent decades have seen permanent basing of a supercarrier group, and at times a second carrier would even stop by at particularly sensitive moments. How times have changed. As far as the Americans are concerned, most of its alliance network has outlived its usefulness. The Middle East's oil isn't needed, and the trade powered by oil was never directly used by the Americans. Every link in the logic chain that has kept American power tethered to the Persian Gulf has broken. Since 2007, the total number of American military personnel in the region across the belt of countries from Morocco to Afghanistan has shrunk from a high of over 250,000 to under 15,000. Contrary to popular belief, the withdrawal isn't an issue of an ideological split in American political thought. This isn't the new normal. This is the transition to the new normal, the transition to the disorder. There still may be many reasons for many powers to have interests in the region, but since none of those powers is the global superpower, the strategic stasis that the region has existed in for the past 40 years is breaking like river ice in spring. The region will be left to sort out its own local geopolitics, and those geopolitics are, in a word, nasty. Relationships throughout the greater Middle East and Islamic world are in the process of being reset, and there are dozens of stories to be told. The Persian Gulf isn't simply the most critical to global energy supplies, it also is most dynamic in terms of its local geopolitics. The Gulf is home to 7 countries that collectively produced 30 million barrels per day in 2015, a touch over 30% of the global total. The two major powers are Saudi Arabia and Iran. The governments of these territories have been strategic rivals for the better part of the past 1,500 years. They are in hostile opposition to each other on nearly every matter of principle or practicality imaginable, and the American withdrawal heralds the bloodiest competition between the two in the past 2 centuries. Citizens of Iran predominantly practice Shia Islam, while the Saudis follow a militant, puritanical strain of Sunni Islam. clerical interpretation on both sides labels the other as heretical. Saudi Arabia holds holy cities of Mecca and Medina, locales sacred to all Muslims regardless of denomination. Riyadh has on several occasions denied Iranians access. Globally, the Sunni outnumber the Shia 6.1, which encourages major Sunni powers, like Saudi Arabia, to claim to speak for Islam as a whole. But within the Persian Gulf, the Shia outnumber the Sunnis, which encourages Iran to claim to run the region. Saudi Arabia is a dictatorial monarchy ruled with an iron fist by the House of Saud, a dynasty that in part draws its legitimacy from its self-described role as the leaders of Sunni Islam. Iran is a semi-democratic theocracy, with political authority rooted in the thousand-strong religious leadership of Shia Islam. In both cases, religious rulership and political rulership is fused. Religious edicts often carry the full weight of the state behind them. Both take a brutally hard line toward political dissent, particularly toward religious practice that doesn't match state sanction. Primary means of enforcement include the use of autonomous religious police, public executions, and large internal intelligence services expressly designed to maintain civil control. Saudi Arabia sees itself as the natural rallying point for Arabs everywhere. Its biggest competitor for that role is Egypt, the most populous Arab state and the Middle East's longest-lived Arab culture. Egypt's attempts to export its secular, military-backed Arab nationalist state model throughout the Middle East region earned it the enmity of any governments that were not secular, military-backed, and nationalist, which includes Saudi Arabia. Egypt's peace with Israel in the 1978 Camp David Accords sealed Egypt's fate as persona non grata at Arab gatherings. That fall, coupled with Saudi Arabia's staggering oil wealth, launched Riyadh's rise to prominence as the premier Arab power. Iran is a Persian power swimming in a sea of Arabs. Persian identification is less strict than Arab ethnic or Saudi family identification. After generations of living in Persian lands, many groups start to consider themselves Iranian while still retaining distinct non-Persian cultural markers. But the key word there is generations. Even after millennia of such grinding assimilation, non-Persians still account for half of contemporary Iran's population. Iran's population mostly lives up on the Iranian plateau and nestled against the country's many mountains, where the elevation is sufficiently high to wring out a bit of rain to support agriculture. That base has enabled Iran to develop a differentiated workforce and a fairly broad industrial base, by far the most varied and sophisticated in the Middle East, with the sole exception of Turkey. In contrast, Saudi Arabia sits atop a pillar of sand mortared with oil. Total manufacturing, not including oil-intensive operations like refining and chemicals, is only $30 billion. The Saudis import nearly everything, including nearly the near entirety of their labor force, skilled or otherwise, and in excess of 80% of their foodstuffs.